Good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Watley, Vice President of Community Engagement at CBiz and Chair of the Board of Directors of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us today for the 2020 Power of Diversity event. This is our first ever Power of Diversity that has gone virtual, but it's more powerful than ever. The event looks different this year because of the COVID-19 crisis, but it won't stop us from honoring 4 members of the Greater Kansas City community who are doing outstanding and important work to advance diversity and inclusion. Their experiences and expertise come from different places: a philanthropic foundation, large businesses with a global footprint, and a small yet impactful nonprofit. But the work that they are doing is leading to positive change. This morning, we will also celebrate our champion of diversity and honor an entire company that puts diversity and inclusion at the center of how they operate. This isn't always easy work, but it's work that makes a difference in difficult times. In the past 6 months have been definitely some of the most difficult. COVID-19 has impacted all of our lives and exposed inequities in healthcare, education, and business. At the same time, protests sparked by the death of George Floyd at the hands of police have led to a new call for racial justice across the country and in Kansas City. The growing Black Lives Matter movement has made all of us stop and look at the systemic racism that has been in place for generations and has left far too many people behind in our community. In fact, that's been the theme of our series of listening sessions presented with our partners at the Urban Neighborhood Initiative. We've heard from Black businesses, owners, activists, elected officials, parents, and students to understand the Black experience. We've explored the policies and laws that led us to this point. And today, our panel will look at where we go from here and how we can harness the power of a movement and turn it into meaningful change. You'll have the opportunity to connect with our panelists after the event in our virtual breakout rooms, so be sure to stay with us. We are also honored to hear remarks from our keynote speaker, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II. The Congressman has certainly been in unique positions over the years, and we look forward to his thoughts. 2020 has been a year unlike any other in our lifetimes, but it has also shown us why the work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important. It is no longer business as usual. And before we begin, we want to thank our generous sponsors. Their continued support makes it possible for us to do this important work, whether in person or online. Thank you to our 4 presenting diversity sponsors for 2020, Evergy, Hallmark, Sprint. And from our 4th presenting sponsor, please let me introduce Lisa Ginter, CEO of Community America Credit Union and Treasurer of the KC Chamber Board.
Thank you, Carolyn. I would like to thank Carolyn Watley for her leadership as chairman of the board in 2020. The Chamber continues to be a convener even during difficult times, to continue to be a leader in diversity and inclusion work here in KC. At Community America, we have deeply felt the social injustices that have occurred in the last few months. We join our community, our nation, coworkers, members, families, and friends in sadness and in concern. I believe when we are faced with difficult challenges, opportunity presents itself. And with opportunity comes hope. Hope for all. At the forefront of everything we do is people. We care about people. During this time of opportunity, we must work together to drive change. I encourage all of you to join me in reaching deeper, embracing our values, and ensuring the people of KC know your commitment to them is steadfast. Community America is full of people who share a passion and dedication for supporting and including each other and our members across the metro. We share a diverse mix of backgrounds, cultures, generations, identities, and families. We wrap our arms around and pick each other up. We have different perspectives and points of views. We don't always agree, but we strive to celebrate one another and view our differences as strengths. Diversity is not an effort or an initiative. It's part of who we are to the core. We stand to help each other, our members, and this beloved city in good times and in bad. As we continue striving to be an organization that our employees and members can be proud of, let's lead with love, support, and empathy to those we influence and serve. Thank you for being part of today's program. I'd like to now introduce Vanessa Sims, Chair of the KC Chamber's Diverse Business Committee and Senior Vice President and Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion at UMB.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you again to all of our sponsors. Good morning, everyone. As Chair of the Chamber's Diverse Business Committee, it's wonderful to see so many of you with us this morning, even though we can't be together in person. It's my pleasure this year to recognize this year's group of ACE Award winners. An ACE Award honoree is committed to diversity and inclusion in the workplace and in their daily lives. They bring growth to business because a diverse and inclusive workplace has a stronger bottom line. They also bring innovation because when you encourage employees and coworkers to be their authentic selves on the job, it leads to great ideas and solutions. So today, our first ACE honoree is no stranger to the Power of Diversity event. She moderated last year's panel on the CEO Action Pledge. Dr. Andrea Hendricks, Senior Director, Global Diversity Inclusion Strategy, Cerner Corporation.
I am the Senior Executive Director of Diversity and Inclusion for Cerner Corporation. I have responsibility for global initiatives related to the D&I focus. I coordinate workforce, workplace, marketplace, and community initiatives worldwide for Cerner. The approach that we have with our diversity and inclusion effort is a comprehensive strategy. So we start out with a strategy that has multiple levels of engagement. So we have the executive engagement platform, we have a manager leader platform that we're developing even more so now, and then an associate engagement platform. The favorite part of my job is that I have an internal and external perspective or opportunity. I get the distinct pleasure of working with very diverse leaders, associates that bring a lot of passion for this area and opportunity for this area. So having a never a dull day, but working with diverse individuals on a regular basis internally. External is another thing. I have a blended approach to my role. So I really get a chance to connect with community leaders, community organizations, and help their mission and vision play a part to the success of diversity and inclusion for them, as well as how it can connect back to our organization, how we can foster and support and be an advocate internally as well. I think it's important to me, I think two ways that I look at diversity and inclusion: from a personal lens and a professional lens. I grew up around great thought leaders who were invested in diversity and inclusion in the community. I have family members who are ministers and pastors all over the country, and I also worked in the diversity and inclusion office at a university. So I got exposed early on about equality, equity, and justice for all. So I have a personal commitment or lens on why diversity is an important element. And then professionally, what I've done for my career over 17 years is worked in the diversity and inclusion space, helping organizations, helping associates, and helping communities really onboard and advance diversity at all levels.
Congratulations, Dr. Hendricks.
Thank you so much. I am honored to be a part of a great organization, and certainly the Greater Kansas City Chamber. Thank you so much. Honored to be here today and receive this award.
Troost Avenue has long been considered the racial dividing line in Kansas City. But our next ACE Award winner has been working to make it a place to come together and serve. Our next honoree is Father Justin Matthews of Reconciliation Services.
I'm the Executive Director of Reconciliation Services. So Reconciliation Services is a nonprofit social venture working to cultivate a community in Kansas City that's seeking racial and economic reconciliation. Our goal is to transform Troost from a dividing line into a gathering place and really reveal the strength of all. So Thelma's Kitchen is our first entrepreneurial social venture where we really flushed out the fullness of our theory of change. Being a donate what you can restaurant, we're about the furthest thing from a soup kitchen that you can imagine. We're a scratch kitchen, and I think we may be one of the only 5-star Yelp rated restaurants on Troost Avenue. But the reality is, when people come together and they begin to break bread, there's something really special that happens. Those barriers and those walls, those facades and masks that we put on in order to protect ourselves from what we're afraid of, when we begin to share a meal together, naturally they just come down. So for me, growing up in Kansas City and growing up in Johnson County, and now being a white man who's also clergy, working on Troost, it's not lost on me. It's not lost on me that I come to the table not understanding and not feeling the things that my neighbors understand and feel, and I have a lot to learn. So the favorite part of my job is when I have the ability to go downstairs and to be the greeter at the front door of Thelma's Kitchen. I love standing at the front door and writing down people's names. I see an opportunity to lift up the priorities of the chamber when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion and actualize them. I see the opportunity for a shared prosperity. I see the opportunity for us to make Kansas City more beautiful, not just through the buildings, but through our diversity and the intentionality that we bring to our development.
Congratulations, Father Justin.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to receive this award, really on behalf of our entire staff at Reconciliation Services, and most especially on behalf of the 5,000 plus neighbors that we serve every year. Thank you so much.
Our next ACE Award winner is Murray Woodard.
Responsibilities of a program officer is a traditional grant maker. My role is a little unique in the sense that I lead what's called our sustainability team, which is community engagement and innovation. One of the very first initiatives I launched when I stepped into this funding role at the Kaufman Foundation was what we call Great Schools Visits, GSV. And in that initiative, we take community members from a cross-section of Kansas City around the country to look at urban schools that serve the same population of kids that we serve in Kansas City, but are higher performing. But I definitely bring a diverse perspective, which is interesting given the fact that I am from Kansas City, but I actually attended school in the school districts that we work to serve and improve outcomes in. I'm a product of Kansas City Public Schools. Was born and raised on the east side of Kansas City, and so I bring that perspective. I bring the lived experience from those that we are really trying to have an impact on. One of our grantees in New Orleans supported an initiative called the Race Equity Institute Initiative, and so had a chance to go down there and really see what I thought was one of the most impactful racial equity discussions that I had ever been a part of at that point in time. I left there jealous that New Orleans was doing this work before Kansas City. I left there making a decision that we in Kansas City would begin doing that work. Didn't know how at the time, but it has led to what is now Kansas City's REI initiative. It would be in our best interest and the best interest of our future if we did what we should have done a long time ago and sit down and said, what do our kids need? Take the things that work best from both sides of the house and create a third way. And I think if we do that in every industry, in every system, I think we can create a country that we're proud to live in. We can create a country that everybody has an opportunity to live, work, and play in. And that wasn't our reality in the past, and we know that to be true. And so I hope that we walk into this new normal, leaving the things behind that didn't serve us well.
Please welcome Kristen Harris, Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at Hallmark, to present this year's Supplier Diversity ACE Award. Hallmark received this honor last year.
Good morning. On behalf of Hallmark, I'd like to thank the Greater KC Chamber for inviting us to join you in celebrating the power of diversity in our city. We proudly support the Chamber because your efforts to make our region a more diverse and inclusive place to call home reflect so many of the beliefs and values ingrained within Hallmark. Our beliefs that people are our greatest asset and that when you care enough, you can change the world, fuel our desire to understand the unique experiences and perspectives of each life. They also enable us to bring about products, content, and experiences with a level of creativity and innovation that simply would not exist without the full appreciation and inclusion of a diverse lens. Now, more than ever, we are committed to living up to the expectations of our brand, which promises to help you live a more caring, connected life full of meaningful moments. It's meaningful but challenging work, especially in moments of crisis like the ones we're experiencing now. But it's also Hallmark's reason for being. We exist to deepen human connection and to help people care for one another and their relationships, and very few companies in the world claim such a privilege. So like many of you, we have spent a lot of time over the past several weeks discussing the unique role our brand can play to bring people together and foster understanding in the fight against systemic racism and injustice. And we've decided to start with our employees. Leaning into our foundation of care, we are putting greater intention and accountability behind a few key areas where we believe we can make meaningful change and have lasting impact. It starts with our individual learning and understanding of how systemic racism is at play in our daily lives. And together, we are working to do three things. Elevate our recruitment, retention, and development of people of color at every level of our company. Challenge the inclusiveness and cultural sensitivity of our products, content, and experiences. And finally, focus our advocacy on creating a more just and equitable society and community for all. In all of these areas, we're looking to find opportunities at the intersection of Hallmark's mission and the unmet needs of our employees, consumers, community, and suppliers. And in all of these areas, we're prepared to fill important gaps and make the necessary changes to realize the fullest potential of our brand. And that includes the role we play in partnering with diverse suppliers. When we think about the role of diversity and inclusion in our supplier program, we draw from the same thinking that informs our commitment to D&I throughout our employee base. Much like the work we're committed to doing with our employees, we know that the more we can understand the systemic hurdles and hidden biases that our diverse suppliers face, the better we can overcome them and work to build a better experience across our entire portfolio of brands, including Hallmark Global, Crayola, and Crown Media. Whether we're helping to build deeper human connections through our greeting cards, gifts, and family-friendly television, or fostering creativity and innovation through our products and experiences for children, we do so in service to our brand, and with the awareness that we can and must do better to bring about a world that affirms the rights, belonging, and dignity of all people. Again, thank you for the opportunity to celebrate Kansas City's power of diversity. We are proud to join you on this journey and look forward to turning positive intention into real action and lasting change for our community. And now for this year's Supplier Diversity ACE Award. Supplier diversity may not sound like a glamorous area. It's not a field that's in the spotlight often, but it's incredibly important when it comes to inclusivity and supporting small business. It's also how larger businesses can be good corporate citizens. Hallmark knows this firsthand, as we were honored to receive this award in 2019. We're proud to honor our Supplier Diversity ACE Award recipient, Jeff Blazing of J.E. Dunn. Jeff knows strong relationships are key to successful supplier diversity. Thank you.
I'm a group manager at J.E. Dunn, and I've been in that position for 4 years. A group manager, their main responsibility is to manage a book of business from the time we chase the work to the time we hand it over to clients and then continue on with client relationships. Supplier diversity in our industry is providing work contracts to non-white male owners and to minorities, women-owned enterprises. And in the field, it's to make sure that we don't have all white male construction workers. 22 years old, I've been developing relationships with our local minority and women-based contractors. So that's how I work in supplier diversity. The relationship with Axiom is one of the coolest things that I've been able to be a part of at J.E. Dunn. They are a firm that Vince Stevens and Daniel Felder are the owners. They explained what their mission was to give back to the community by growing their business. We talked for a couple weeks and we decided we're a great fit. Culture-wise, how we treat people, and we decided to jump in and do a full-blown mentor-protege relationship, and it's been a great success. They did over $3 million worth of work up at the airport for the terminal, and they're going to do a similar amount of work for the garage up at the airport with us. So it's another growing, diverse subcontractor in our system that is going to be around for a long time. We can't have the same people do the work all the time. Relationships are the most important thing in our industry, but especially with our M&W contractors. The relationships, that's why I work at J.E. Dunn. I love the people inside our office. I love the people in our industry. The relationships that we've built over the past 18 years, my best friends have come from the industry.
Please congratulate this year's Supplier Diversity ACE recipient, Jeff Blazing of J.E. Dunn.
Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. I can't tell you how honored I am to be recognized for something that I am extremely passionate about. I spend a good part of my week, every week, working on this. And it's just great to work for a company like J.E. Dunn that really engages in our community and gives back. And you guys have my commitment to keep on doing what we're doing and get better at it. Thank you.
Congratulations, Jeff.
To present our Champion of Diversity Award, please welcome this morning Silas Doolin, the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Evergy.
Good morning. I'm Silas Doolin, Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Evergy. We spent the morning individually honoring people doing outstanding work in their communities. Now it's time to honor one special organization with the award of Champion of Diversity. I'm honored to present this award as Evergy was one of the first businesses to receive this prestigious award nearly a decade ago. The Champion of Diversity Award recognizes a regional business that has an impactful commitment to embracing diversity in their workplace, the diverse supplier partnerships, and also within their communities. The Champion of Diversity is a business that can demonstrate practices which support the business case for workforce diversity as a strategic initiative by ensuring the diversification of staff, suppliers, and community outreach as a normal business practice, policy, and a part of their culture. They will be able to demonstrate their organizational practices are inclusive of all people, no matter the person's race, national origin, religion, age, disability, marital status, veteran status, military status, genetic information, sexual orientation, or gender identification. Like all companies, Evergy has been gripped by the racial divide over the last 5 to 6 weeks here in our United States. We've been shaken to our absolute core, and we've been searching ways to find a better path to be more equitable for all. Last summer, we created a DE&I position that reports directly to our president and CEO. And most recently, we have been speaking a lot more publicly about the racial injustices that are happening, not only in our world, but also within our organization as well. Now, please don't hear me say that Evergy is the gold standard when it comes to handling diversity, equity, and inclusion. As a matter of fact, we've been grappling with the fact that we've not done enough. We recognize the road is very long and very arduous, but we are ready for the fight. We are embracing this and tackling the challenges head on. Not only did Evergy receive this award, 10 years ago, as I mentioned previously, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're in such great good company. So organizations such as Black and Veatch, Shikardi and Bacon, Burns and McDonnell, Children's Mercy, J.E. Dunn, Sprint, and UMB, just to name a few. And we're pleased to welcome another recipient into the group. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to announce the 2020 Champion of Diversity Award goes to Truman Medical Center. Congratulations.
Truman Medical Center University Health is an academic health center providing accessible, state-of-the-art, quality healthcare to our community, regardless of the ability to pay. We see about 130,000 patients a year. We do it with the team we describe as the brightest minds and biggest hearts in the cities, who strongly believe that everyone deserves exceptional care without exception.
One thing about diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just one person's responsibility. It is the responsibility of the entire organization to be ambassadors and to promote and support a culture or environment where everyone feels valued and acknowledged.
The point of the Diversity and Inclusion Council is to ensure that we are an ear as well as a voice for our internal and our external customers.
We have a strong LGBT community that we serve. Trying to find LGBT staff that have passion in the field is a big thing that we're working on.
Employees want to go into organizations and look around and they see other people that look like them. From the bottom up, they want to see people that look like them in leadership positions. It's really important that it starts from the top, like our CEO.
Diversity is one of our greatest strengths. Where we see there are gaps, we work for solutions for filling those gaps. We've been lucky enough to partner with churches, faith groups, libraries, community centers, and schools to bring both testing and free masks to the community.
Our patient population is so diverse. We're part of the community just like them, so it's important for us to have a presence in this community.
It helps us better understand the beliefs and cultures of the people who are putting their health in our hands.
Collaboration's a big part about healing. So if I'm gonna follow my medical care plan, I need to know that my medical provider cares about me and what's valuable to me.
What makes me proud about being part of this initiative is I've worked for this organization for a very long time, and just seeing the changes that have happened so that everyone is heard and no one feels like they're being left out.
We're serious about trying to move the needle and make meaningful change around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Please congratulate this year's Champion of Diversity, Truman Medical Center's University Health. Accepting the award is Hospital President and CEO, Charlie Shields.
So thank you. I'd like to start out by thanking the Chamber for placing a focus on diversity and for its advocacy for diversity and inclusion in public policy, which is incredibly important, as well as making sure that diversity and inclusion are part of every single Chamber initiative. I'd also like to thank the strong leadership at Truman Medical Center's University Health for making sure that diversity and inclusion are given the level of importance that they deserve. Ruth Pollins, our Chief Human Resource Officer, brought with her when she arrived at TMC an insistence that diversity not be taken for granted, and an understanding that inclusion is something that has to be worked on every single day. She developed the Director of Diversity and Inclusion position held by Willie Pegues to make sure we are practicing what we are preaching and building a more inclusive atmosphere, creating a workplace that acknowledges our differences and our strengths. I'd also like to thank Nikki Donema, our Chief Community Relations Officer, for making sure that our community outreach efforts reflect what we truly believe, that everyone deserves exceptional care without exception. I'd like to end by saying that while I'm happy to accept this for the entire staff at TMC, I'll add that I know that we all know that this is just a beginning. If we are to be role models, we hope you will join us in acknowledging there is much more to do. We are absolutely committed to determining the next steps, to finding the gaps within our systems and to fill them, and to make sure the TMC always reflects the community that we are absolutely so committed to. Thank you.
Please welcome Deanne King, Chief Human Resources Officer for Sprint T-Mobile.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Deanne King, formerly Sprint, now T-Mobile Chief Human Resources Officer, and proud born and raised Kansas Cityan. Thank you to the Chamber for putting together this very timely series. They do such great work and really are terrific partners to us all. Before I introduce our distinguished keynote speaker, I'd like to share a bit about the panel's question for today. Where do we go from here? Since we're all here today, I think it is safe to say we've probably asked ourselves this question at least hundreds of times, especially in the past few months. First, let me say I certainly do not have all the answers, but I can share a bit about how T-Mobile has decided to approach this question and about our experience in getting there. As standalone companies, both T-Mobile and Sprint were extremely committed to DE&I, both inside our company doors and outside. But even still, the level of commitment and determination our employees have demonstrated in these past months towards DE&I is completely unprecedented. When Black Lives Matter voices moved to the forefront of the public consciousness and shined a bright light on the systematic racial injustice that persists in this country, it felt personal to all of us. As T-Mobile leaders, we were really sitting with this question, where do we go from here? And we quickly reframed it to how do we leverage this energy? How can we learn from our employees? And what can we do to really change the future? We all felt such a strong call to action, to do more, to work even faster. And we knew it was a historical moment for the new T-Mobile when we were still showing our employees and the world who we are. It didn't just matter that we took action, but it mattered how we did it, inclusively and collectively. Let me share 4 examples of actions that we're taking. We've been spending a lot of time proudly and openly standing with our Black community. We've been listening. We've had hundreds, possibly thousands of hours of all-hands meetings where employees told their stories. We've held vigils, and we've given employees time to reflect. Like others, we're investing in new programs and policies to better attract, develop, and retain our underrepresented talent. And externally, we're making significant community investments to causes that align with DE&I. We've invested over $25 million to support tech entrepreneurship for our communities of color. And we funded one of my personal favorites, Project 10 Million, which is designed to help eradicate the homework gap. Finally, T-Mobile entered into an agreement we call the Memorandum of Understanding with 6 multicultural leadership organizations. Together, we're building a multi-year community investment plan to promote equity and accessibility in the world of 5G. Why am I sharing all of this? Because I'm proud. I'm proud of the work we're doing, but more importantly, because I think it's critical that companies are transparent and we're accountable. Now it's your turn. Let's keep raising this bar together. It is my honor to introduce this morning's keynote speaker. From his days preaching to his time leading Kansas City, and now to his distinguished career serving the residents of Missouri in Congress, please welcome Congressman Emanuel Cleaver II.
Hello, friends. I appreciate you having me here today to virtually discuss the power of diversity. I want to start by congratulating each of today's awardees for their efforts to boost diversity among this community's business and powerful communities, along with the communities of color. Your contributions do not go unnoticed, and your work is critical to creating a more equitable and just society in Kansas City and the metropolitan area, and frankly, all across this country. So thank you for your work. Thank you for everything you've done to make this community a better place in which to live. As someone who has dedicated the majority of my life fighting for civil rights, it's always good and refreshing to see the next generation taking the step after our steps are being shortened. It's always good to see the next generation stepping up to the plate. Remember, our founding promise was all men and women are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As reported in my hometown newspaper, the Wichita Falls Times, I led my first demonstration when I was 15 years old. I was about as crazy as you could get, and so I recruited some other crazies. There were about 50 of us, full of hope and desire for justice, as we silently marched from the east side of Wichita Falls, Texas, the African-American neighborhood in this little sleepy town of about 112,000 people in north central Texas, all the way across the tracks into downtown Wichita Falls. At that time, African-Americans were still not allowed to go into any of the 3 movie theaters, and we intended to let the world know that separate but equal was, in fact, unequivocally unequal, and the status quo was no longer tenable. With that hope, we wanted to attract the attention of the entire community, but our real hope was getting the attention and involvement of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the organization that he and 4 others founded called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We marched through downtown declaring the time had come for change and that our generation wasn't going to stop until the racist system of Jim Crow was just torn down and ripped apart. And let me be clear, these were 50-something black kids risking their lives. You see, I'm talking about segregated Texas in the 1960s. Back then, if we had been shot down like mangy dogs, I don't think there would have been anyone arrested in that shooting. It was happening all over the country. Fast forward a few years, and I eventually became the Midwest Vice President of Dr. King's organization, the SCLC. And unfortunately, on April 4th, 1968, he was shot down on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, allegedly by James Earl Ray. That's another whole issue. Today, I continue to work with SCLC because the mission isn't finished. Look, I think that it is important for you to know that I've been involved in demonstrations for justice all of my life. And I want you to keep that in mind as I tell you that when I stood up to address the crowd of about 5,000 or so young demonstrators in Mill Creek Park across from the Country Club Plaza, I was blissfully surprised. In fact, I became somewhat emotional and had to pause to fight back the tears. As someone who had participated in all kinds of demonstrations throughout my life, this was the first time ever that I had seen more whites than blacks and browns. Man, I mean, this was a major moment in my life. The first time in all these years. And keep in mind that even the marches that were led by Dr. King, a lot of people thought there were a lot of non-blacks in the marches because what Dr. King wisely would do is have the president of Notre Dame, a priest, on one side and a rabbi on the other. The strategy, of course, was that no one would open fire for fear that they might either shoot the president of Notre Dame or the rabbi. But if you looked at the crowd, there was always just a scattering of whites. But down there on the plaza, it was different. And as I began to communicate with African Americans all around the country, I learned that it wasn't just a Kansas City phenomenon. It was taking place all over the country and indeed all over the world. Similar to the civil rights movement spreading like wildfire through the South, I have come to believe, and irreversibly, that we are witnessing what I think historians will recognize as the great reckoning. At long last, we have birthed a generation that does not see the Black Lives Matter as some kind of black movement to eradicate systematic racism, but an American movement to fulfill the promises our founders put forth in the Declaration of Independence. That's amazing, truly amazing. These young people are from Republican, Democratic, and politically agnostic backgrounds. They come from high and low-income backgrounds. One woman told me that her parents did not approve of her involvement in the protest, but she said, they are Neanderthals. She said, I'm going to do what I think my heart is calling me to do and what I should do for this nation. She said, we are no longer going to sit back silently, because the sign she was holding said, silence is in agreement with the oppressors. Now, the business leaders of Kansas City hopefully understand that change is in the air, and I'm hopeful and optimistic that you will take this opportunity to ride the winds of change toward a better future for our nation and for yourselves, if you haven't had the chance to look at the public opinion polls lately. Americans have completely reversed their opinions of what's going on. I mean, the polls are saying that 75% of the American public is supporting the demonstrators. I can't tell you how amazing that is, that this transformative moment has occurred during my lifetime. I never would have believed that it could happen. I always had hope, but I never ever thought I would live to see it. I hoped that one day my grandchildren would experience it, but I never thought I would. And so at this moment, the business community of our great metropolitan area can make a difference. You can make a change. Things can improve for all of us, and you could be the leaders. Let me tell you how important that could be. A few years ago, how about almost 40, I had an idea as the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that we needed to get the business community and the African American community together. I had this idea, we'll have a dinner in which we will recognize all of the African Americans who had moved up into corporate Kansas City, those who were managers of managers. And we call this the Black Achievers in Recognition Dinner. So we honored the corporations, and we honored those who had achieved. I went over to talk to the only leader I knew in Kansas City at the time. His name was, Henry Block. And I said to him, I would like for you to help pull this dinner off. He agreed. I mean, there was no pushing him. He agreed right there on the moment and became the chair of our first dinner, where we had about 800 people to turn out. And we had about 5 people who were honored. Believe it or not, that organization honored me and thanked me at their 35th luncheon a few years ago. So that shows that things can happen, and they can happen for the good. And that's why just last week I teamed up with U.S. Representative Joseph Kennedy to call for the 25 richest universities to diversify the asset management firms that handle their endowments, billions of dollars. Did you know that the top 25 largest endowment funds comprise over $20 billion, yet many of these universities haven't invested a single dollar, not one penny, with asset management firms that reflect the diversity of their student bodies. And these are colleges and universities that aren't shy about touting their diversity efforts, but again, not a single dollar invested with diverse-owned asset management firms, despite diverse-owned firms being overrepresented in the top quartile of industry-wide performance. That's the top 25%. I'm not just asking corporate America to do what's right. I'm asking them to do what's right for them. These are incredibly capable and qualified, diverse-owned asset management firms that don't receive the same opportunities as others simply because they don't have the long-held connections. And our financial system has a well-known history of this kind of exclusion of entire groups of people. It's something we've seen crystal clear in recent months because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Just look at the Paycheck Protection Program, which I voted on. It was not a surprise to me that minority-owned businesses struggle to access these forgivable loans because they don't have the same long-lasting relationships with financial institutions that other larger, predominantly white companies would have. Now, that fact alone made this program almost into a mockery. And that's why the United States House of Representatives fought to set aside $60 billion for CDFIs and MDIs and localized banks with relationships with micro and minority-owned businesses when we passed the second round of PP funding. We knew we needed to target these loans to get the money to businesses that would otherwise be left behind completely. Think about this. The loans were being forgiven. The banks were not even taking a risk. Maybe you didn't understand what I said. Let me say it again. The banks were not taking a risk. The loans were going to be forgiven. And we still had, in Kansas City, only 24 black-owned businesses that received PPP. 24. Only 24. Think of all the black-owned businesses all over this community. 24 of those received lifelong or life-saving PPP funds. So many of those businesses that were not able to receive funds, they're going to be closing, not for a short period of time, but for good, because this pandemic and the incompetent response from the federal government was just not strong enough to overpower years and years of exclusion. You see, none of these small businesses were able to pick up the phone and call and say, I like human resources to go and file for the PPP. There's nobody to call in human resources and say, go file for PPP. They have no bank where they could walk in the door and they would know who they were. I mean, if you are Billy the Barber, you're running a one-person shop, but that's all you have and that's what you wanted to do in life. So those businesses have failed, many of them. These shuttering businesses will negatively impact communities on the whole as they see loss of tax revenue, jobs, and economic activity, which will take years, if not decades, to recover. And make no mistake, if we do not immediately reverse course to avoid further economic calamity, communities of color will be the most adversely affected because they have failed to receive the same kind of support from the federal government. So while the white-owned businesses will be able to stay afloat, many of them, and I want them to do so, and I want them to weather the storm, but they have long-lasting relationships with banks. They don't have long-lasting relationships with black and brown-owned businesses. This is called systemic racism. It doesn't mean that anybody had a meeting and said, let's exclude black and brown businesses. It just happens because it's the comfortable way of doing things. Now, let me just kind of end by saying that those of you who are in positions and that you are able to make a difference, understand that our country has an ugly history, a very ugly history. But we must not allow the past to be the end of our work. And our past must not be a life sentence. We can break out of this. This is the United States of America. Some of the things we've defeated is just almost unbelievable. But we've not been able to get beyond this long-time boogeyman called race. You can do it. You can become involved. Think of it like this. If you have a garden, all of the work is being done underground. You plant the seeds and then you do the watering. All of the growth and development is going underground. You can be those that help plant the seeds and helping to water these small minority businesses. You can do it. Now, if I did not think that we could get beyond this, my heart would break into 1,000 pieces. I am absolutely certain that we can get beyond this moment. We have not been given a life sentence by God to be a nation fighting each other. A man is walking by a baseball diamond and he sees little kids out playing. And he looks up at the scoreboard and it's 18-0. And so he walks over to the little kids who had just come off the field, who were out in the field, and the little boy standing by the fence was holding a bat and swinging it. So the man walked over to the little boy and he said, hey, I know this is terrible. He said, I guess you guys are about ready to go home. And the little boy said, go home for what? And he said, I'm looking at the school board. And he said, the school board says that it's 18-0. And he said, it is 18-0, but we haven't come to bat yet. And that's where we are as a nation. If the business community comes to bat nationwide, if the business community comes to bat in this community, I am absolutely convinced we can overcome an 18-point lead or whatever we have to defeat. We can do it as a community. Your mission, should you accept, is to just go do it. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you having me.
Please welcome Nicole Jacobs-Silvey, co-founder of Connection Coach KC.
Good morning. I'm Nicole Jacobs-Silvey, and it's an honor for me to be here today. Before I begin the panel discussion, I must thank Congressman Cleaver for that rousing introduction and the inspiration for the panel today. Sir, thank you for your lifelong work and commitment to equity and the inspiration for the panel and the event today. Black Lives Matter is not a new movement, and sadly, it took the death of George Floyd at the hands of police to bring global and national attention to the issue. The Black Lives Matter movement is one that we must listen to, the business community and beyond, and they are listening. As we continue on this movement, it is important for us to listen, and listen we must. In fact, I've had the honor of being part of one of the 4 listening sessions that the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce convened to honor the experiences of Black Americans in Kansas City. We have listened to lawmakers, we've listened to activists, students, and community leaders as they shared their experiences in their places of employment. Today, we will seek to take action as well as look at the steps necessary to diminish and mitigate anti-racism in our community. Today, we have some honored speakers that will join us, and I start by introducing them in alphabetical order. Please welcome to our panel today, Mark Garrett, the Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer of Blue Cross and Blue Shield and the Vice Chair of the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Next, we have Wendy Gillis, the President of the Kauffman Foundation, Joe Reardon, President and CDO of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, and Kansas City Councilwoman Melissa Robinson of the 3rd District. Maurice Watson is our last panelist, and he is the former managing partner of Hush Blackwell. Thank you for joining us today. It's an honor. As we mentioned, this is not a new conversation, and it's hard to believe that it's been 2 months, precisely 65 days since George Floyd's death, which was the catalyst to so much of the conversation that has been happening. As we think of the work that the business community has done, how do you feel that we can continue to keep the momentum going, continue sustainability, and also hold us accountable for changing in areas of equity and inclusion? And I'll ask Mark to answer this question first.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you everyone that's participating today. This is such an important topic and one that I have a great deal of passion about, not only because I'm a Black American, but also because I'm the CHRO for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And I think it's so important that all organizations, whether you're a corporate organization or a non-for-profit or government, find ways to recruit and develop young people of color into their organizations and give them the resources and the tools necessary to be successful in their career. As I think about my 30-plus year career, both in human resource roles and supply chain roles, I'm thankful for the mentors that I had at Hallmark Cards and Farmland Foods and now at Blue Cross Blue Shield that are giving me the opportunities and the challenges and the projects to advance my career and to expand my impact within the community. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to work collectively together to have a lasting positive impact on diversity and inclusion within the employment realm, but also in our social justice conversations.
Thank you, Mark. And Maurice, can you add on to those comments that Mark stated? He mentioned some key examples of ways in which he has had his career fostered and the equity practices that exist. How do we operationalize those so that we have sustained impact and longstanding commitment to this issue?
One way is to ensure that the commitment to diversity and inclusion, and also the conscious opposition to what I can best describe as the assumption of white supremacy, that our organizations are metastasized against that kind of racism and white supremacy, which is to say, we have got to address these concerns not only from an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, but every single officer, every board member in our organizations must have a commitment, must have an understanding of how institutional and systemic racism has profoundly disadvantaged Black people and other people of color, but principally Black people in our country over a very long history. There must be a recognition that addressing that long history will not be easy, and it will take more than the emotion of feeling bad, of feeling horrified in response to what one might describe the open and notorious racism reflected in the George Floyd situation. There must also be an awareness and a commitment to reversing our institutions, to ensuring that at every level of leadership, we have Black men and women and other people of color making important decisions in evaluating opportunities and the impact of what our businesses do on communities of color.
Thank you so much. And Maurice spoke very specifically about how it cannot just fall on the shoulders of Black people, not just on the diversity officers, but that it needs to go across all sectors. And I want to speak to Councilwoman Robinson about that. The intersectionality of this issue. We know that anti-racism work is multifaceted and systemic oppression has many layers. And to dismantle that is going to take a concerted effort. Can you speak to the intersectionality of bringing education, philanthropic community, the business community, the civic community together, and what strategies we should take?
Yes, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. I think one of the things that we first have to do is to really reframe the use of equity. Equity is a tool that we use to achieve parity. So we have to make sure that our goal is in sight, and that is to achieve parity. Equity is just, it's a lens that we can take on and take off that helps us to see and amplify the disparities that exist. But we know that the picture doesn't change unless we change it. And so it gives us an opportunity to make those adjustments to achieve parity. But it's not by happenstance that our communities are in the situations that they're in. These are systems that were designed to produce these very products. And so in order for us to dismantle them, we can't do it incrementally. I know that there are many engineers and system thinkers that are joining us on today. And so this is our opportunity to recognize our colossal socioeconomic failure and to dismantle the system and build a new system in which we can achieve parity.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And what we've seen is, and we heard loud and clear in the listening sessions, the outcomes of systemic oppression and how redlining has affected our community, how access or lack thereof to capital and economic disinvestment has been an ongoing issue that has plagued our community based on the systems. Wendy, I wanted to ask you, being from the philanthropic community, there have been comments about accessing not only capital for for-profits, but accessing funding from foundations for not-for-profit organizations. Can you share some of the strategies that the foundation has used and your thoughts on how we can continue to build equity and dismantle racism?
Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah, this is an issue that's close to our heart at the foundation. And so inclusive entrepreneurship is a path we've been on for about 6 years now. And when you look at disparities in entrepreneurship, there's none greater than access to capital. And we see this particularly among Black-owned businesses. If you look at all the venture capital that's out there across the nation, only 1% goes to Black-owned businesses. Black entrepreneurs are 3 times more likely to be turned down for a bank loan. So clearly work needs to be done in those spaces. But in the meantime, there's alternative capital, forms of capital that can get money into the hands of entrepreneurs of color. And so some of the things the foundation's been doing the last couple of years is we've been supporting AltCap, which is a local CDFI. You heard Congressman Cleaver talk about the importance of CDFIs. And during the COVID crisis, when so many businesses were, on the tipping point of closure, worked with the Chamber Civic Council and others to put together an emergency response fund to get money into the hands of small business owners that were the most fragile, that didn't have access or couldn't get access to PPP funding. You heard Emanuel Cleaver talk about only 24 Black-owned businesses in this community received that funding. And so this got low to zero interest loans, flexible terms. I'm grateful for the banks, the philanthropy, the business community that came together to raise more than $4 million. But I'd also say we could have and should have done much more. There are communities and states across the country that raise 3 or 4 times as much that money. And so I'd like to see us rally together. You've got to get money into the hands of these entrepreneurs, and that requires sometimes getting into the hands of fund managers and investors of color. This is also a national issue, and another approach the foundation is taking is that we have seeded 5 alternative investment funds across the country that are doing something that's not quite venture capital, not quite loan. They're doing something sort of hybrid in the middle that's serving a different kind of entrepreneur. And 2 of those 5 funds are led by African Americans. We're also convening a pipeline of these, a network, I guess I'd say, of these alternative funds. And of that network, 51% are led by women, 40% or more are led by people of color, which is multiple times more than mainstream fund managers. So those are a couple approaches. I'd also say, and you mentioned some of the organizations in town that are working specifically with entrepreneurs of color. There's Porterhouse KC, there's Project United Knowledge, what Father Justin is doing with reconciliation services. We need to support these organizations. They scrap for funding. And we at the foundation are happy to provide funding, and that's part of our mission. But others can chip in as well. It's very important to get money into the hands of these support organizations that are trying to help the next generation of business owners. So anyway, those are a few things that we're trying at the foundation.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I heard intentionality. I've heard us talk about strategy, operationalize. How are we going to hold ourselves accountable as business leaders so that this moment that we're in doesn't fade as people get fatigued? How do we hold ourselves and reflect, and while noticing progress, not patting ourselves on the back and stop? Joe, do you have any ideas about ways in which we can do that and how that affects the role of the chamber?
Well, thanks, Nicole, and I want to thank everyone for attending today. I do want to reflect for just a moment on this moment in time. The convenings we had, the listening sessions, and you moderated one of them, Nicole, were our most subscribed to, most interested folks came into those. Over 600 people regularly were in those convenings. We've had no larger gatherings than that, except one, and that's today's event, where we have almost 1,300 people that have joined us. That rivals our annual dinner. There's no other event that comes close. And what that means, I think, is that business is open and is interested in a way that it hasn't been before. And we can't let this moment simply pass. That's so critically important to take advantage of this. And not to just, I think Kansas City's really good at this. And I've heard this from some of our leaders on the board, not just to come up with a program, each of us come up with our own program and go execute it and say we've succeeded, but to really figure out how we can have a holistic approach that impacts this region and is sustained. And that's hard work. That's what makes it challenging and different. Any of us could come and package up a little program and say we've made an impact, but that won't move the needle. And so I think it's really important for us to understand that collaboration is going to be extremely important here, and then sustaining it, being willing to measure ourselves. In the business community, we know how to measure. And if we're not willing to measure against this, it will fall to the wayside and it won't be a priority. And I'll give you an example of just within the chamber, because we have to focus on our own institutions. We've re-engineered our strategic plan. We did this last year to have one of our pillars be inclusive prosperity. And we're focused on instituting a diversity and inclusion plan, equity and inclusion plan for the chamber. We're not far enough along. So there's a sense of urgency for us inside that I hope is reflected in every organization in Kansas City. But secondly, we have to look at who represents us, who's on our boards, what does that look like? And we've been on a journey at the chamber. Our nominating committee very much is focused on diversity on the board, but we are nowhere close to where we want to be. And we haven't institutionalized that. We have to institutionalize it. What's the goal and how are we going to execute against it? And I do want to give some credit to our Centurions program, because they had a goal to make Centurions more diverse. And they've been focused on it for 3 years now in a very intense way. And that means going out and recruiting, not just hoping somebody's going to come in the door. And so in the last 2 classes, diverse participants make up 37% of one class and almost 40% of another. So this can be done if we make it a priority and we hold ourselves accountable. And we need to do that within the chamber with our own board. But if we say we want to do that with our own board, which is composed of leaders across Kansas City, then it's a challenge to every organization, as Maurice has said, to make sure that you're recruiting and then promoting the African Americans and other minorities to the level that they're going to be ready and able to interact with the chamber. That's so important. This is all very much tied together. And we've got to focus on accountability and measuring and sustained kinds of programs. That's, in my mind, a real important part.
Thank you, Joe. Absolutely. I asked the panelists to reflect on each of you are leaders in your own spheres, and we've talked a bit about the intersectionality and the nature of this work cannot be done alone. It cannot be done in silos. That's what we've done before, and what's gotten us here won't get us there, right? And so in what ways can you reach out and encourage other business leaders to not only operationalize within your institutions or your spheres of influence, but also to reach out and collaborate, as Joe said, with others? And anyone can answer. Maurice? I think you're muted.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm very pleased to hear the specific examples that both Wendy has given in terms of what the Kaufman Foundation is doing. One of the things that's very clear, if we're going to address centuries of economic disadvantage for Black people, we're going to have to do that through overt affirmative investment in people, in Black people and in Black communities. We have got to get the money and the resources in the hands of Black people. Congressman Cleaver said we need to get the money in the hands of Black investment asset managers. We've got to get the money in the hands of Black business people through PPE and every other government and philanthropic and quasi-private program. We have got to get the money in Black communities. If we do that, that is the example of what we can show within our community, from one organization to another, and throughout and outside our community as well. Are we a role model or not? And we can only be a role model if we can show our commitment, our specific commitment. I will tell you, to the extent in the industry of law firms, we have law firms who compare their performance against each other. That happens in business as well. So we shouldn't, as we are comparing our performance against each other, be satisfied with a marginal performance. We want to excel. And I think it is shameful that very few of us have performance metrics in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion that we can say, this is excellent performance. We are so proud. We need to work toward that objective.
Thank you so much, Maurice.
And may I add to that as well? Thank you so much. So one of the things I've been working on is around economic development incentives, and this is where the tool of equity does really come into play, because when you look at the disparity between affluent Kansas City and Kansas City's ghetto, which is also and translated Kansas City nice, the east side of Kansas City. And when you look at those disparities, we have to look, yes, at a growth mindset of how we want to grow and what we want Kansas City to be over the next 10 years. But we also have to look at how are we, if violence is the most pervasive issue that we're dealing with, when we talk about intersectionality of how education, housing, entrepreneurship is producing this outbreak in this epidemic of violence in our community, we have to look at how are we incenting developers to help solve Kansas City's most pervasive problems. And that doesn't mean that it's a one or the other. It's a growth mindset, but it's a precise mindset. It's about us thinking about how do we grow, not arbitrarily, but purposefully. And so I think that it's really critical for us to come together and to think about that growth and how do we incent development to solve our most pervasive problems.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Well, I'd like to finish. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Wendy. No, you go first.
All right. I just wanted to, this might sound elementary to some, but I think one way, maybe it's a first step before this coming together is that everyone needs to have kind of a common language and understanding. And so I think that means getting educated. And for white people, that doesn't mean asking our Black colleagues or Black friends to educate us. It means taking your own initiative. There are books you can read. The foundation's been really proud to support the work of the Racial Equity Institute. More than 500 people in Kansas City have undertaken those sessions, which provides a really rich experience about some of the data of the disparities that exist, and then a history going back to Jamestown. And it shows you kind of where we are today and how this is sort of embedded in our system. And I think that's really powerful to have that understanding. If you're aware, then you figure out, you become more aware and you start asking questions and you start looking for things you hadn't looked at before. So I think that's critical. And the last thing I'd say is that one of my favorite quotes of Mr. Kaufman is, he said, all the money in the world doesn't matter unless people work together. And if people work together, there's nothing that can stop us. This is not a money issue. Money is going to be needed, but this is a coming together and having a collective will to really transform things.
Thank you. And Mark?
I'll kind of wrap up the question real quickly here. One of the things that I always say is that all of us work for organizations that have figured out how to address and resolve some of the biggest problems facing our organizations. We put resources to it. We bring in consultants. We do whatever it takes to solve the business problem. This is a business problem. This is a societal problem, and we will have to work together collaboratively, intentionally to resolve these issues. I told the story that, for 30 years, I've been on diversity and inclusion councils. And while we've made some progress, we have to recognize that there is still significant work to be done. Just because we've had our first African-American president doesn't mean that we've arrived. And so we have to continue to look at what are those things that are oppressing people of color, that are preventing our communities from being their best. And I think all of us can work together to be more inclusive and change the dynamics that are plaguing not only our city, but our nation as a whole. And so I echo a lot of the comments that were made by my fellow panelists, but this is something that we really have to take advantage of while there's so much energy and passion on the topic right now. If we don't act now, we'll never get it done.
Thank you, Mark. Well said. And my thoughts are the convening that we had today as in this panel is the cumulation of the listening sessions that we've had, and they were to listen so that we could learn, as Councilwoman recommended, and now we're to act. So in advising the Chamber, who is a convener of many business leaders and beyond, what can the Chamber do moving forward to be beyond, as we've mentioned, it's beyond a one-off program, beyond just a diversity council? How does the Chamber go about the work of helping business community to continue this work in a very intentional and strategic way? Councilwoman, do you have any suggestions?
Absolutely. So one of the things is that we need the Chamber to frame this as a winnable initiative. This is something, and it has been said, this is something that we can do if we are rowing in the right direction. The other thing is to make sure that we're elevating and making sure that the Chamber is elevating those voices that play a critical role in effectuating change. We also need the Chamber to really, and Mr. Reardon stated it, that this is a moment of urgency. Now is the time. We cannot let up. We cannot regress. We have to get moving and take action now. And then finally, really being the example of what inclusion looks like and making sure that the Chamber is very transparent in your change, in which Mr. Reardon has talked about the things that they're looking at, the things that they're doing, the things that they're changing, because the business community is looking to you to be that example. And so we can do this, and we will, work with the Chamber and work with all of the businesses and all of the sectors that are involved to take those strategic directions to make transformative change, not incremental change, but transformative change that we need.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else want to respond to that question? Advice for the Chamber? Wendy?
I think what Melissa said is spot on. I'd add that the Chamber has a unique position in serving small businesses. So, the large businesses that we hear from, they have the resources to hire DEI officers and to have, robust recruiting practices. I think sometimes smaller businesses don't have those sort of resources and tools and information. So I think the Chamber could be a great convener to provide tips and tools for the smaller businesses that don't have access to some of the resources that the larger companies do.
Thank you.
Joe has already mentioned this, but I just want to emphasize the fact that business is driven by data. The best, most successful businesses make business decisions based on data. I mean, we also talk about it as metrics these days. Everyone loves metrics. Well, I think a unique and important role that the Chamber can play is in developing reliable and helpful metrics for the business community around economic inclusion, how that benefits both individual businesses, but the community as well. This kind of data also ought to be relied upon by the city council and other governmental entities as they're making decisions about things like who to give a tax incentive to based upon development. Before making those kind of decisions, are we evaluating whether or not the applicant has really demonstrated a commitment either through prior practices or through this new development to economic inclusion, to development and investment in underserved Black communities and communities of color?
Thank you.
And then again, I'll wrap up here. I think we've done a nice job as a Chamber member and officer of the Chamber. I think we've done a nice job of creating programs. I think it's time for us to take our inclusive prosperity program and take it to the next level. What does that really mean, and how does that impact communities of color? How do we hold ourselves more accountable as business leaders representing the Chamber to create metrics that are achievable, but also will stretch us beyond our comfort zone? Growth comes from being uncomfortable, I'm sorry. And I don't think enough companies are uncomfortable yet with what's happening in the world. We often look at I think we talked about this yesterday, we often look at our business success and ask, why do we need to make a change? We need to make a change because it's the right thing to do. And we have so many members of our society that are disadvantaged because we're not uncomfortable with what's happening in our society. And if we are uncomfortable, we're not doing anything about it. And so the chamber should be one of the first voices out there to talk about social injustice, economic inequity, and other factors that are plaguing our communities.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really love what I think Councilwoman Robinson said first, and many of you echoed, I know Joe did, is that transparency. It's hard for us to admit the areas of growth that we need, and it's easy for us to celebrate those successes as a place to stop, and that transparency is going to be key. I'm thinking about the young people that we had the honor of listening to on one of the panel discussions, and if you didn't have a chance to hear them, I encourage you to go to the YouTube channel and listen, because they dropped some great nuggets of wisdom and aha moments. And I'm thinking about how I want all of them to stay in Kansas City. So what do we need to do as a community to recruit and retain talented individuals like those panelists? Start with Mark this time.
Sure, thank you. One of the things that Blue Cross and Blue Shield, we're already discussing this, and we got this idea from actually J.E. Dunn, and so we're certainly going to model our program after theirs, or maybe we can partner on this together. But we think it's really important that at the high school level and the college level that we start introducing more people about insurance careers. We have a broad range of jobs and opportunities for those that are degreed versus those who may just want to graduate from high school and come into our industry, and then they can work on their degree later. And so we're going to create a technical training program that allows people of color, underrepresented communities to come in and learn about the insurance space. We're going to combine it with some scholarship opportunities potentially. We're going to potentially look at tuition reimbursement for those that are already in school to get them to come in and grow their passion around the health insurance space. There's so many different opportunities, whether it's mental health or sales or marketing. We have every job imaginable there, and we want to make sure that Blue Cross Blue Shield is doing their part in the community to advance equity within the young people of color that aren't necessarily thinking about Blue Cross Blue Shield as a career opportunity right now. So,
thank you, Mark.
Nicole, I'll say that I talked about centurions before, but one of the things that one of the signature things that the Chamber has done for decades is leadership development, particularly for the business community. So Gen KC, Centurions are our signature programs. We need to make sure that these aren't efforts for diversity in those aren't just driven by a moment in time, but that they're institutionalized into that work. That is so very important. I'm proud of the progress that Centurions particularly has made, but we need to institutionalize that and make sure that it's at the forefront of what that program is about. So I think, and I think we can look at other leadership programs within that the Chamber can either be a collaborator on or a supporter of, that get more African-American professionals engaged in the broad business community. I think that's really important to keep great talent here. We need to do more than we've been doing.
Thank you. Maurice?
One of the exciting things that's currently happening in our community is that big philanthropy, including the DeBruce Foundation and Kauffman, is increasingly focused on talent development at the pre-collegiate level through real-world learning experiences, which is to ensure that what is taught in school aligns with the needs of business and the workforce. In so many cases, we've had people graduate from high school with a high school diploma, but no real demonstration of capability and readiness to work in the jobs that we have in our community based on the demands and the skill sets that we need. The DeBruce Foundation and Kauffman is working on this problem. First, identifying what are the needs and the expectations that employers have. What are the skills that employers are looking for in employees? Ensuring, and then the next step is to ensure we are developing those skills, working in collaboration with all of our school systems and our schools to ensure kids do have the capability. I mean, we have a talented workforce of young people, but there's underperformance because we have underprepared them to do the work of the jobs that are in the future. So I think that's really a bright spot. And I think we need to expand awareness of the work that's being done in this area in terms of preparing people to have a successful, independent economic participation through high earning jobs in our community.
Thank you, Maurice. We're getting to the end of the panel discussion. It went so quickly as we knew it would. And so I wanted to go around to each panelist and give you just a final moment for a final thought as we move on to the next section. So I'll start with Wendy.
Nicole, my final thought would just build on what Maurice said, and that's that there are so many avenues to success, whether it's a non-degree pathway or a degree pathway. And I'm going to put a plug in for the hundreds and soon to be thousands of talented students of color, graduates that are going to be coming back to Kansas City through the Kauffman Scholars Program and the Kansas City Scholars that are looking for jobs. And if you can't find them, look harder, because the whole point of this program is to get them to some sort of post-secondary education so they get into a high-paying job. And so that's a great talent pipeline for those of you who are looking to diversify your teams. So please give them a chance, because they are talented and they're passionate and they're right here in our community.
Councilwoman Robinson, thank you.
Just quickly, I will build off of what was just said regarding the quality of life. We know that the quality of life for African Americans, when we look at the data for the city of Kansas City, is on the lowest spectrum. And so it is critical that once we train young people, that they're able to stay here and that they have the quality of life that they deserve. And so that's going to take us to look at, again, all of the intersectionality of what's happening in Kansas City for African Americans. And it is about an opportunity gap. What are those opportunities that they're not receiving based on whether it's education, employment, entrepreneurship, all those things? And that is fixable. We can open up opportunity for individuals, as we've demonstrated on this webinar today. And the other thing is that while I'm in this temporary council seat, we know that this is hard work. It takes courage, it takes conviction in order to do this and to push the needle. So as a woman of color in this empowered seat, I will continue to and be committed to not only having the courage, but the conviction to work with, enjoying together with others to make Kansas City what we know that it can and should be.
Thank you for your leadership. Maurice?
I would just say that many of us have been blessed with great success in this community. I among them, and certainly we have grown fat and happy. But I think we are at a juncture in the history of our community where each of us needs to be prepared to respond to the challenge that Darren Walker, head of the Ford Foundation, made to us recently. He said, listen, we've had many people feel very bad about what's happened in our country with George Floyd. We are now at the point of reckoning, as I believe the congressman may have said, which is to say, what are we willing to sacrifice individually? What are we willing to sacrifice in all of our institutions to address, to eliminate the kind of injustice and the inequities that we've struggled with in our community, in our nation far too long. So really the challenge is, what are we ready to sacrifice? What is the personal sacrifice we're ready to make? Many of us are not willing to put our lives on the line as Congressman Lewis did, but we can do something. And we need to be ready and willing to do that at this point in our nation's history.
Thank you, sir. Self-reflection is definitely key. Mark, did you want to say some final thoughts? Did you have anything else to add?
Absolutely. I would say that 3 things that I would ask of the participants today. And again, thank you for giving us so much of your time. We have to expand our inner circle of influence to be more inclusive. It's hard to become more diverse and more inclusive if our circle of friends look just like ourselves. And so we got to do more of that so that the world can become a better place. Just another request to hire and develop more people of color at all levels of your organization. And if your organization is off the public transportation route, I would ask you to figure out ways to create a benefit program to get those individuals to where the jobs are. And then finally, I would say that we have to do a better job of addressing discriminatory acts and statements. We can never allow a statement that is hurtful to go unchecked. And whether it's within our little circle of friends or in the broader community, we have to start checking those statements. We will never become the society that we want if we allow intentional, blatant discrimination to go unchecked. And so all of us have a role to play in fixing that component of society. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we could listen twice as much as we talk, but he also gave us 2 feet and 2 hands. And so it's now time for us to act. So let's use our hands and our feet to transition from listening to acting.
Well said. Thank you so much. We're come to the close of our panel discussions for today, and I'll be soon turning it over to Joe Reardon, but I wanted to thank each of you for your time and thank the Chamber for sponsoring such a wonderful event and giving the opportunity to discuss this topic. I heard lots of things, but I think it comes down to, I heard reflection, strategy, action, and then accountability. So thank you today. The conversation was wonderful and robust. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I want to thank
To leave
Nicole.
us with closing remarks, please welcome.
Thanks so much, Nicole. I want to thank you very much for moderating an unbelievably great discussion. And I want to thank our panelists as well, Mark Garrett, Wendy Gillis, Councilwoman Melissa Robinson, and Maurice Watson. Before we close out, I wanted to give Murray Woodard the opportunity to accept his award live. We had a technical glitch and some of you didn't get to hear his acceptance remarks. That can happen when we're using Zoom, and we've all experienced it, and that happened right when Murray was accepting. So I think we've pulled Murray back up. Murray, congratulations, and certainly want to give you a chance to give some remarks to the audience.
Right. Well, first, thank you, Joe, and thank you to the Chamber for this opportunity to come back on and publicly accept this award. I think it's important to come back on and accept it publicly because I accept this award not only on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the Kauffman Foundation and the amazing Greater Kansas City community that helped make this racial equity initiative the success that it has been. I listened to some of the panelists talk about all of us need to do this work together, and that's truly what happened. So I'm receiving this award, but this is definitely a community effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray. And again, congratulations to you. And I want to congratulate all the ACE award winners, Dr. Andrea Hendricks of Cerner, Father Justin Matthews of Reconciliation Services, and the ACE Supplier Diversity Honoree, Jeff Blazing of J.E. Dunn. I also want to congratulate Truman Medical Center's University Health, our 2020 Champion of Diversity. And before we really close out, I want to express my sincere appreciation to everyone that's either been on this Zoom at this event or been a participant at it. I want everyone to know that the Chamber is committed, and this is an imperative for our city and region, to address structural racism and to work on inclusive prosperity in transformative ways. We state that commitment, and we state it in partnership with you. We ask for your partnership. We want to collaborate with you to move our community forward and to address these difficult but critical issues for all of us. So thank you very much. Also to Congressman Emanuel Cleaver for his amazingly inspiring words, and our major sponsors of today's event. I want to again thank Community America Credit Union, Evergy, Hallmark, and Sprint, actually now T-Mobile. Later this fall, the Casey Chamber, in collaboration with the Reach Foundation, Shabir Advisors, Citizens Concerned for Immigrants and Refugees, and Welcoming America, will launch the Greater Kansas City Welcoming Plan. We at the Chamber have partnered with more than 40 organizations in the region to develop a plan to make Kansas City a welcoming community for all. Look for the official launch date invitation coming out soon. Next up, if you'd like to continue our panel conversation or congratulate one of our award recipients today, we invite you to join us in the breakout rooms. Please check your emails for the links to participate. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us today. I look forward to working with you. Our entire Chamber team does. It's been an absolutely powerful morning. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Welcome back. And to those of you who are able to stay, we have Joe Reardon and Councilwoman Robinson able to answer additional questions that you may have. I know the panel discussion was robust, and many of you may have individual questions that you would like to ask of our panelists. Please feel free to use the chat to ask those questions. If not, I have a few questions lingering that I can ask to get us started. When I think about Councilwoman Robinson, economic development is such a large topic and a large issue. And when we think about not just Kansas City, but across our nation, there's often gatekeepers that limit the access or have the influence for the access for communities of color. Can you speak more specifically about some of the work that you're doing in economic development? I know this is an area where you have great strength and great leadership.
Sure. So one of the things that we've introduced, Councilwoman Park Shaw and I, is an effort to, again, look at achieving parity as it relates to economic development. When we look at our GASB reports from last year, the school districts that were north of the river had a $10 million reduction in revenue. When you look at the schools south of the river, there was $40 million of reduction of revenue. And so when we think about the needs of our community, again, we have to think about what those priorities are and ensuring that the people who are most impacted by our decisions are respected throughout the decision-making process. So I've introduced actions that causes my council colleagues to think about what the priorities are for each district. And then let's develop incentive policies based on those priorities within a given time. And we know that those priorities change. But we know also that the very foundations of our community are impacted from a social economic standpoint when we pull those resources out. Our mental health fund, for example, and when we talk about crime and violence, mental health is a critical piece of that. Our library system, which I say it's the amusement park for our mind, if you will, where it's a free access opportunity for individuals to gain economic mobility. Our transportation system, KCATA, our metropolitan community systems, when we talk about preparing individuals to be workforce ready and to gain those training instruments, they also are a taxing jurisdiction. And so again, we have to look at things not from a scarcity mindset, from a growth mindset, but let's prioritize what those things are and incentivize those projects that solve our problems as a city.
Thank you. Joe, did you have some comments to add on to that? Otherwise, I had a question for you.
Yeah, no, I do have a couple comments here. Sort of feeding off of what the councilwoman has said, I think if you look at, we have to be bold enough to say, if you look at our economic development incentive system today, one of the places that it hasn't performed well is in incenting development, particularly on the eastern side of Kansas City, in areas of disinvestment. And maybe it's no surprise to anyone that still is with us today that that's the area of Kansas City that was redlined historically. And so that area of disinvestment, if we think that incentives, and I believe that part of what incentives should do is spur on development there, it hasn't worked. So we've got to go back and look at the system and understand what can we do or what is missing to get to that point where we can start to do place-based development in areas where it hasn't occurred in decades. So we need to look at it from a systemic standpoint and figure out how to do that. I think there are ways to do it, but it certainly will change some of the ways that we have done things to date, and we have to be willing to do it. And I think there are individuals in the development community, smarter minds than me around this, that are trying to figure that out right now, and I'm excited about it. And if I could say one other thing relative to, I didn't get a chance to say this during the panel, but if we look ahead just a little bit, there are more unique things that are going to happen. We're going to have a presidential election in November. We may have a new president and a new administration, or maybe not. But the fact of the matter is, we also sometime probably next year will have a vaccine. And I believe other people believe this too. But if we anticipate what might happen, you could see Congress coming with a large stimulus package sometime next year to juice the economy back up as the vaccine gets distributed. What we can't have happen is what the congressman rightfully called out, which is in the PPP program, almost no Black-owned businesses getting access to it. There will be dollars again when the economy gets rejuvenated. We've got to make sure as a region, and Chamber can't do this alone, we need partners. We got to make sure that we are activated to get money, capital into minority businesses in Kansas City so that they can feel the bump of the economy coming back. And if we don't, I think it's going to be a failure for us as a city. So that opportunity is coming. It's a little bit a ways away, but it's not that far away. And I think it will happen. The odds are that these things will happen, and we need to be ready for it in a way that I don't think we were previously.
Thank you so much, Joe. And for those of you who are still with us or may have stepped away and come back, we have 60 participants that are still joining our ongoing conversation. Councilwoman Melissa Robinson's able to stay with us, as well as Joe Reardon, and questions are coming in. So first question for our panelists, are there specific policies and legislation that would advance equity? So we've talked a lot about creating policy. People want to know, what does that look like? And either of you can answer.
Yes, I certainly can start with that. And so one of the things that to build on what Mr. Reardon was saying around the economic development tools have not worked because of the level of blight. The deep level of blights do not make economic development projects successful as relates to the ability to gain the investment on the other side of it because of the deep levels of blights. And one of the things that I applaud Kansas City for doing is passing the 1/8 cent sales tax to say that we are one Kansas City. So we have to begin to layer on those incentive tools so it does make sense for developers to come on the east side of Truce. And so that's one thing from a policy perspective, but then also we have to look at how those funds are being utilized and ensuring that there are additional policies to make sure that those investments, again, solve pervasive problems that we have. And so I introduced something that requires, if you receive funding from the city to do housing development, that you have to use federal standards not to price people out of their homes. And that's one of the things with the opportunity zones that you saw in other parts of the country, is that gentrification happened and people weren't able to keep up with the gentrification, the longtime residents that were there. So we have to begin to look at how do we address those issues. I also introduced a suite of policies as it relates to economic mobility and also addressing the blight, for example, with a lot of the illegal dumping, the large amounts of trash that are in the 3rd district, of saying that we need to have automatic bulky item pickups within 12 blocks of every K through 12 school. Kids should not have to walk in their neighborhoods amongst all of the, again, blight and trash that's there. The other thing is looking at paid internships for young people through that the city needs to be providing, and also looking at implicit bias training for every city employee. So with all of the solutions that we have, there is, I believe, a policy framework that we can start to enact to address, again, the problems that we're seeing. And so I won't go on. I probably have introduced about 30 either resolutions or ordinances of some in some nature over the past year, but those are just some things that are coming to mind.
Thank you so much for your leadership. Amazing.
A couple quick thoughts, and the councilwoman did an amazing job speaking to this. So I just have a couple quick ones. One is I'm familiar with some cities that actually in their public works programming have an equity measure. And so what they're trying to do in those cities is actually allocate more investment through public works into areas that have been areas of disinvestment or areas where you see heavy parts of blight. That's a really difficult kind of policy to enact. Having been a former elected official, you know, every council person or commissioner wants to fight for their district to get what they can get. But that is something to think about that really institutionalizes how you're investing precious dollars in public works. I think the other one to think about is really more of a regional one. And Kansas City, Missouri already does a good job of this, quite frankly. But are there policies you can enact that really require businesses to locate or make the expenditures to have public transit accessible to the workplace? That's a very important piece. It was mentioned by the panel earlier. We have a transportation big five at the chamber, and a lot of it is workforce access. And right now, there's a mismatch. There are a lot of folks that want to have a great job, and there are great jobs, but there's no efficient or reliable way to get to that work. We've got to fix that. And it's a region-wide issue. And it requires policy change, and it's going to require a commitment by everyone to be more intentional about this issue. So I'm hopeful that we can move the needle on that.
Thank you so much. The other question that we have is related to what we've seen in the region or in other cities. And so you answered that, Joe, really spot on. You know what I noticed that's different during these 65 days, and I so appreciate it. It might just be my anecdotal experience, but people are naming and owning so many of these issues and topics that people of color have experienced that we spoke about in our community, but didn't seem to get recognition. I just love hearing gentrification, redlining, access to capital being addressed and stated as issues that we all need to tackle. So thank you, Joe, for doing that. I hope that you could share, Joe, a little bit about the role of the chamber. You spoke about this the other day when we were on a call, and I thought that was really insightful, and I'd love for the rest of the audience to hear your thoughts on that, because I think it really frames your work and the work ahead.
Yeah, last year we refreshed our strategic plan, and that's when we added inclusive prosperity as a pillar. And not only is it a pillar, we're trying to figure out if the work that we're doing and what we're supporting is supportive of inclusive prosperity across the board. So for instance, we've always been focused on transportation, but thinking about within transportation transit and empowering people to a job is a bit different than where the chamber's ever been before. So we're doing that across the board. But in that refresh of our strategic plan, we sort of have a lens about how the chamber ought to be acting. And we aren't always the right group to be the leader. So we try to evaluate in an important critical issue that we know we want to play a role in. Is our role a leadership role? Is it a collaborative role? Is it a role to advocate, which we can do pretty good? We have good resources for that. Or is it a role that we merely are convening? And so we need to figure out the right role for the chamber at every time, because that's going to be when the chamber can add the most to an effort. I'll give you an example. In our Tobacco 21 efforts, we weren't the leader, but we were part of a collaborative, and we went around to every city, including Kansas City, Missouri, and we said, look, we think this is an important enough issue that you ought to change the purchase age from tobacco from 18 to 21. So we were a voice in an amazing collaboration, maybe a different voice than others, but that was our role. In other places, like around access to capital, that might be one where we need to be more of a leader. So that's the way we're constantly trying to understand where the chamber can have the greatest impact. And sometimes it's not that we're in the leadership role. Mm-hmm. We're the leader. It's that we can bring people together that otherwise might not come together. So anyways, that's the reflection, Nicole.
Thank you.
Can I add something, Nicole, real quick, just to put Mr. Reardon on the spot? So one of the advocacy issues that I think that the chamber can take up immediately for the next legislative session, the enabling legislation that allows us to collect the 1/8 cent sales tax that produces about $10 million, probably more like 7 with the pandemic this upcoming year. It precludes us from investing in retail. So that means in this area that is zoned, that is, historically disinvested, there is a provision that does not allow for us to help to support small businesses. So we'll be coming to the chamber to ask to add that to the legislative agenda.
So it's the retail sales tax that is collected, and then you can't use it on retail. It doesn't seem to make
sense. No, you can't, yes. Only in historic districts. So yeah, only in historic districts. But yeah.
Well, let's definitely get together on that, Councilwoman. I appreciate you bringing it up. I did not know that, actually. So
I love it, because that's the perfect note to end on, this collaboration, real talk among colleagues who have a shared goal, and that's equity in our community. So I love that. Just final statements. I heard Joe saying that he's determining for the chamber their role. And I think that's what we have to do individually. Reflect, self-reflection to determine our role within our businesses and our organizations. But the key part is we all have a role. And so I've been saying the expression foot on the gas. And so onward we go. Thank you for being here today. This was a wonderful opportunity. I really appreciate you, and more to come. Enjoy your day.
You're like a circle that floats around me, keeping me safe and sound. And when I fall, you tied a rope to me. You're blessing me every day. I was down with an illusion, like a sparrow with broken wings. But now I shine with your reflection on me. I'm getting back up on my feet. That